देश के 20 राज्यों की 91 सीटों पर वोटिंग शुरू।
Voters are heading to the polls in India today with nearly 900 million voters across the country.
It's the largest democratic exercise on earth.
And today, none of them are as well funded as Prime Minister Modi's Bharatiya Janata Party.
Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. Here are some of the stories we're covering this week. In India's elections, one party is definitely winning the media game. The Trump White House. Is it using new rules for press passes to lock out journalists it doesn't like? Myanmar, where the refugee story and the coverage of it continue to make news. And looking to be inspired? Then look elsewhere. It's been a little more than a month now since the first votes were cast in the largest democratic exercise on the planet, India's general election. Prime Minister Narendra Modi wants a second term, and his party, the BJP, seems destined for victory. How much of that is due to Modi's genuine popularity, and how much is down to the BJP's sprawling publicity machine is another question. It comes down to the money. Over the past financial year, the BJP's publicity budget has been 20 times that of the main opposition party, the Congress. That's a lot of extra rallies, billboards, and social media ads, all spent to brand Modi as the leader Indians need, the antithesis to what the BJP calls the country's weak, anti-national, and anti-Hindu opposition. Throw in a few dozen celebrity endorsements, Bollywood style, a mainstream news media, most of whose support the BJP gets for free, and that adds up to an election that looks like Narendra Modi's to lose. Our starting point this week is the campaign trail in India. In India, the election story starts with the numbers, and they are staggering. More than 900 million voters, 7 stages of voting lasting 5 weeks, more than 2,000 national, regional, and state parties, more than 8,000 names on the ballot, and more than 400 television news channels, regional and nationwide, covering the election. And based on the media output, one would be forgiven for concluding that this election is about just one candidate, Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
The BJP certainly has an extremely effective campaigning weapon and an icon in the figure of the Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and nobody knows that better than Mr. Modi himself. Now, India has a parliamentary election, but since Mr. Modi has arrived on the scene, our national election has repeatedly been described as presidential style.
If you see what has happened to how MP candidates are named, that is getting pushed back later and later. You're 2 weeks away from the date that you're going to go and cast a vote, and you don't know who is standing for elections in your neighborhood. And the only way that works is that you don't care who is standing for elections in your neighborhood because you're voting for Modi.
Narendra Modi is not the first person to have made Indian elections presidential. Political parties have benefited from having a strong leader. What stands apart in case of Narendra Modi is that whenever things have gone wrong under other leaders, they were blamed for it. In case of Narendra Modi, whenever things go wrong under him, somebody else is blamed for it. Whereas when things go right, he's the one who takes all the credit.
The kind of visibility and name recognition Narendra Modi benefits from does not all come for free. For the financial year 2017-18, the BJP spent the equivalent of more than $80 million in election publicity, more than all the other parties combined, and that was before the campaign had formally begun. For one period earlier this year, the party spent $100,000 on Google advertising alone, 10 times more than its Congress party challengers. And Modi's BJP is also India's biggest Facebook advertiser. Those are among the places the BJP's money is going to. Then comes the issue of where that money is coming from.
The BJP has found a way to cloak these funds that it receives in absolute secrecy. It has introduced a new system of electoral bonds which allows for completely anonymous donations. We don't even have a way of tracking who exactly is giving this money to the BJP and why. What are they getting in return?
Now, in the last year for which this data is available, the BJP's income was 3 times the size as the combined income of the next 6 largest political parties in the country. Now, that's a huge order of difference. And it translates into a massively different spending budget.
So the BJP currently spends about 20 times as much on election campaigns as any of the other parties. They've really managed to have a very comprehensive presence from the national all the way to the local level. People are told when they are supposed to put out what content, how specifically to write the words, whose content they have to retweet, when they have to retweet it. This is a really massive centralized campaign which reaches everyone all the way down to the ground.
That's how effective BJP social media machinery is, that their communication skills are. On the other hand, they are up against Congress, which is not even close when it comes to its communication skills. They fail in creating a chat around their schemes. Their campaigns start on Twitter and end on Twitter. The BJP, they are also helped by the Hindi media that is smitten by Narendra Modi and that has worked a lot in keeping his image intact.
Pradhan Mantri ji, how's the Josh? Are you confident?
The reasons for the mainstream media's preoccupation with Modi range from the commercial to the ideological. The Prime Minister's brand of nationalism and penchant for bellicosity are marketable commodities that play well on the hundreds of news channels that battle for viewers 24/7. In 2014, Modi came into office having campaigned on economic issues, promises of development, and agrarian reform. During this campaign, the primary focus has been on national security, issues like Kashmir and Pakistan, and the BJP's interpretation of India's identity as a Hindu-first nation.
सौगंध मुझे इस मिट्टी की, मैं देश नहीं मिटने दूंगा.
News outlets are also acutely aware that the BJP-led government is the country's biggest media advertiser, and the party wields that money tactically.
If you turn on any news channel during a prime time hour,
Wake up! You will destroy your own country in the way that you are going.
You're likely to be barraged by sometimes hysterical declarations of loyalty to the nation and to the state and to the armed forces, and somewhat implicitly to the ruling party.
हजारों फीट की ऊंचाई पर बर्फीले तूफान के बीच सीना तान कर खड़े हैं वो.
You could easily say that one of the successes of the Modi government has been to co-opt major media houses, especially television networks, by very careful management of government ad funds, of which media houses are patronized with interviews from ministers or from the Prime Minister.
The media business has always been precarious. With what has also happened now, media companies are now raising revenue by doing events for which they require the attendance of top-level government functionaries, including the Prime Minister.
देश की उम्मीदों का नाम है मोदी और दुश्मनों की मौत का पैगाम है मोदी.
Now this in turn introduces constraints on the freedom of taking on the government, of holding it accountable, of not wanting to alienate the powers that be.
The other medium Modi's BJP has mastered is film, through the Prime Minister's courtship of Bollywood A-listers, tweeting at them, taking selfies with them, even being interviewed by them. On April 24th, 2 weeks after voting had begun, Modi had a series of softball questions lobbed his way by Bollywood actor Akshay Kumar, who was playing the role of an interviewer.
अगर आपको कभी एक अलादीन का चिराग मिल गया और जिन कहे कि आपके 3 विशेस हैं, तो वो आपके 3 विशेस क्या होंगे?
India's election rules forbid such interviews during the voting period. However, the news agency that put that interview out, which is closely tied to the BJP, argued that since no journalist was involved, the interview was not journalism. It was apolitical.
What is apolitical when it involves a person standing for elections?
क्या हमारे प्रधानमंत्री आम खाते हैं?
When you sit through the interview, you realize that Narendra Modi loves mangoes. He was a poor person. He made it a point to point that out.
मेरा background, मेरी दुनिया, आज की जो राजनीति का तौर तरीका, उसमें ये सब बैठता ही नहीं जी.
And it highlights how he is a self-made man. And this is really important because the person he's standing against, Rahul Gandhi, is the son of a prime minister, he's the grandson of a prime minister, he's the great-grandson of a prime minister. And Narendra Modi comes across in this interview as everything that the common average Indian is or aspires to be.
Film actors in India have a long history of being involved with politics. So the involvement of Bollywood isn't entirely new. Selfies of Bollywood celebrities with the Prime Minister are carefully planned, as are tweets that the Prime Minister tags film actors is a symptom of how carefully, with great attention, BJP plans its media campaigns.
Though it does make you wonder why a Prime Minister who has so much time for Instagram influencers and to meet and selfie himself with Bollywood stars has not had the time to hold a single open press conference and has been the first Indian Prime Minister to fail to do so in a 5-year term.
We're discussing other media stories that are on our radar this week with one of our producers, Tariq Nafa. Tariq, the Trump administration and the White House press corps are back at it. What's this latest issue over accreditations?
Well, this week, Dana Milbank of The Washington Post reported that the White House had revoked his press pass in what he called a mass purge of accredited reporters. Press pass holders get privileged access to the White House, as well as the opportunity to ask questions of government spokespeople. But the Trump administration recently changed the criteria for accreditation. The new rules disqualify journalists who've not been in the White House for at least half of the previous 180 days, a requirement that, according to Milbank, excludes most of the press corps. Trump's press secretary, Sarah Sanders, said the change was about improving security. But the concern is it makes journalists' access conditional in a way that could disqualify reporters the White House doesn't like.
And this would not be the first time that the White House has played the credentials card, would it?
No, that's right. You'll remember that highly publicized spat last November between President Trump and CNN reporter Jim Acosta.
On the Russia investigation, are you concerned that you may have
I'm not concerned about anything with the Russian investigation
because
it's a hoax. That's enough. Put down the mic.
After that exchange, the White House revoked Acosta's press pass, only to restore it again on the orders of a federal judge. But the dispute was a sign of how the administration views the televised press briefings and the headlines they produce. One more point, this White House hasn't held a formal press briefing now for 2 months, the longest stretch since the tradition began under Bill Clinton in the early 90s.
You've also been following the story of an Arab activist who does a lot of work on Saudi Arabia and who may now have a target on his back. Who are we talking about?
Iyad al-Baghdadi. He's a Palestinian-born writer and activist, currently living as a political refugee in Norway. And anyone who follows the Middle East online will know his Twitter feed. He's an outspoken and influential critic of Arab dictators, particularly Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince, Mohammed bin Salman. And a lot of his recent work has focused on the human rights situation in Saudi Arabia. This week, we learned that on April 25th, Norwegian police warned Baghdadi of a threat against him after receiving information from the CIA. After the murder of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi, these kinds of threats are taken very seriously. Baghdadi was a friend of Khashoggi, and he warned that the journalist's killing would embolden bin Salman to go after his critics if the kingdom was not held to account. Among the reasons the Saudis might want to go after Baghdadi, he's recently been investigating a story that Saudi Arabia was behind the alleged hacking and extortion of Amazon boss and Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos. As for the threats against him, Baghdadi sounds defiant. If they don't want to kill me, he says, then I'm not doing my job.
Okay, thanks, Tariq. Breaking news out of Myanmar this past week. After more than 500 days behind bars, 2 Reuters reporters have been released by the government. The men had been jailed for their investigation into the killing of 10 Rohingya Muslims by Myanmar security forces. News of their release was welcomed by journalists and activists around the world. In Myanmar, though, reporting the Rohingya story remains incredibly challenging. Since 2017, almost 750,000 Rohingya Muslims have fled to neighboring Bangladesh, and Myanmar's government has been aggressive in its attempts to control the narrative. However, one network has been reporting the story from the inside, Rohingya Vision TV. Run by exiled Rohingya, the network relies on undercover reporters to get the information out. The stories that they tell contest the official state narrative, as well as the work of media outlets in Myanmar that have closed ranks with the authorities. The Listening Post's Johanna Husnow on the perilous state of media freedom in Myanmar, and the news network telling the Rohingya story its way.
zulum gojji to ar ki balabur hobar ya he andara hen sayare buzi hari to hon thagi ar ara to beshi beshi fayda kol duniyare jane pari duniyare hoy pari fayda kol utai pari to ara hendila sukore lotai to mane lona hadin bishas nagori lotai din bishas gori.
What refugees like Nurul Mustafa, Bosir Ahmed and Mohammed Jubar say they have seen on the ground are acts of rape, torture, massacres of their own people at the hands of the Burmese security forces. Stories that journalists from Myanmar tend to shy away from. For the hundreds of thousands of refugees across the border in Bangladesh, Rohingya Vision TV, or R Vision, provides news from a Rohingya perspective.
We started to get news, actual facts and figures from the ground, and I started to broadcast. So the ultimate goal was to tell the truth, to tell the Rohingya side of the story, and to advocate Rohingya plight, because Rohingya is underreported, Rohingya is misreported.
They're reporting that mass rapes have occurred, that there has been effectively a scorched earth campaign against the Rohingya. That, women and children have been executed, along with men. Rohingya Vision TV helped to sort of counter this idea that it is just a targeted operation to weed out Rohingya militants. But they're, of course, branded as sort of brazen propaganda. And they've been targeted with relentless attempts to discredit them.
We saw at the start of the crisis Rohingya Vision TV very accurately reporting what was going on, the number of people that were fleeing, the scale of the violence. And that information wasn't used by international media at all, because there's been such a fuss made by the government of Burma about the reliability of Rohingya sources. And that's a loss, because they are getting information out on the ground in Rakhine State.
And that's significant. Myanmar's government has blocked all access to the region, turning Rakhine into a black hole for the news. Without access, international journalists have come to rely solely on refugees' accounts, while much of the Myanmar media run with the government's version of events. But Rohingya Vision still has eyes on the ground. According to its founder, Mohammed Noor, the channel has a network of around 20 undercover citizen journalists working around the clock and at great risk to feed information from Rakhine, or Arakan as it's known in the Rohingya language, to their colleagues in Malaysia. Broadcasting in 3 languages, R Vision operates primarily online through its YouTube channel. The network has become a primary source of the news for the Rohingya community, and its multiple platforms typically get more than 150,000 views per day.
R Vision is very unique, and it is the world first of its kind. International medias are not allowed here, so they cannot do their job. So now we have to take over the job. We are the newsbreaker of Arakan, because we convert a citizen into citizen journalists, existing people into journalists, training them and getting the information out with whatever possible equipment they have.
It is very dangerous for the people on the ground that are doing this. The government want to shut this down, they want to stop information getting out, and so anyone who's found to be involved with Rohingya Vision TV would be in danger of being jailed or disappeared. They'll go after the people that are interviewed, they'll go after the fixer, as well as going after the journalists who are doing the reporting.
Those tactics aren't just applied to the Rohingya journalists operating in Rakhine. Ever since the start of the military crackdown in August 2017, the government of Aung San Suu Kyi has embarked on a far-reaching campaign to silence reporters, local and foreign. Intimidation, harassment, and the weight of the law have been used on journalists who cast the government or military in a bad light. Case in point, in December 2017, 2 Reuters reporters were arrested and charged under the Official Secrets Act, a law that dates back to the colonial era, for allegedly having illegally acquired information with the intention to share it with foreign media. Those documents, which supposedly contained information about mass graves in Rakhine, were in fact handed to them by the Myanmar police just minutes before they were arrested. This past week, Wa Lone and Kyaw Soe Oo were finally released, having spent more than 500 days behind bars. The journalists are now free, but critics remain suspicious over the circumstances of their arrest.
Those 2 reporters are very well respected. They're very dogged. Wa Lone and Kyaw Soe Oo and the Reuters teams and the AP teams in the country are known to be very courageous in their reporting on this issue. The government and the military and the police would want to silence them.
The 2 reporters were trying to expose something that the military, wanted to hide. What the 2 journalists did is the main reason that the government had detained them. They still use, a number of laws to detain journalists, and these laws are very useful for the government.
When Myanmar began the transition from military to civilian rule back in 2011, there was hope a space would open up for more independent reporting. That hope has since been shattered. Under Aung San Suu Kyi's rule, reporting critical of the authorities has all but disappeared, especially on issues relating to Rakhine. And it's not just due to government intimidation or self-censorship. When it comes to the Rohingya, most media outlets in Myanmar simply agree with the government line.
The vast majority of journalists, Burmese journalists inside the country, appear to share the government and the military's antagonism towards the Rohingya. Magazines or newspapers like the state-run New Light of Myanmar, which publishes very unsettling, antagonistic editorials and articles that allude to the Rohingya, as, for example, human fleas. So regardless of whether there is space or there isn't space, there's a real lack of will in reporting critically on the military.
I think the local media try not to sort of anger their audience, their readers. So they try to sort of tread a very careful line, trying to balance, do their work, as well as not to sort of make the readership unhappy. Because I think they understand that the majority of the people don't like this Rohingya people.
The government of Burma is trying to say, look, what can we do? We can't take action on Rohingya citizenship because the Rohingya are so hated within the country. But the government has used its media channels, newspapers and radio stations and television to encourage and whip up that fear and hatred of Muslims. So they create this crisis and then they use it as a defense for not being able to act on it. It's the tactic that they're using.
It's a tactic that is proving all too effective, which makes outlets like Rohingya Vision TV, a rare source of the news still operating behind the authorities' veil of secrecy, all the more important when trying to understand all sides of a story that the United Nations calls a textbook case of ethnic cleansing.
And finally, are you ready to seize the day, trust your instincts, and reach for the stars? If not, we have a little something for you. Anyone scrolling through a news feed these days risks being inspired even when you're not in the mood. Who approves of all those inspirational quotations anyway? Who dares assume that there's a market for these kinds of things? You cannot walk past a coffee shop these days without someone trying to galvanize your inner something or other. Luckily, though, there's an Instagram account designed to redress the imbalance. It's called Unspirational, and it offers plenty of useless life tips and demotivational messages, all you'll need to be left uninspired. We'll see you next time here at The Listening Post.
Thank you.